Hello and welcome to our live stream ahead of the China International Consumption Expo, which is starting tomorrow. And today we're going to talk about China's consumer market, emerging trends, the impact of this Consumption Expo on foreign companies and products with our three distinguished guests, Jeremy Stevens, Chief China Economist at Standard Bank, Sherry He, Managing Director of Kearney Greater China, and Saud Malik, Editor-in-Chief of the Observer Diplomat magazine. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us. Now, first, let's talk about domestic consumption in China, which is becoming more and more important to the country's economy. Sherry, why don't we start with you, ladies, first? So, what are some of the emerging trends that you're observing in the Chinese consumer market and also in terms of consumer behavior?
Yeah, there are some trend, right? Like some trend continue, but have some change. For example, digital is still very important, but then people spend a little bit more time right offline, and young people for experience and older people for experience. And then domestic product still grow strong, but like some of the kind of new consumption product that was really popular 2 years ago can become like really not so successful because like people still pay a lot of attention to the product itself. While the market is also important, but product is critical. We also do see the people tends to spend more on service compared to in the past, especially now everything open up. Among all, right, I would really want to highlight, I think one of the most critical trend for the consumption market in China is consumer become more mature. And so value for high quality product become very important. With this, right, you say, for example, among retailers, the really winner, as for now, are the two type of retailers that really meet that trend. For example, the membership store who really offer very high a value for high quality product. And also like all of a sudden, right, over the last 1 to 2 years, you see a large number of discount store format emerged, typically in lower tier cities. And those trends are typically driven by younger consumer, either younger consumer, especially for discount format, or for middle-aged consumer. So it's really important for the consumer company to really observe those trends and respond to those trends.
And Jeremy, what do you observe in the current consumption trend, and how are consumer behaviors evolving in China?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of the stuff that Sherry's already touched on. I spent a lot of time just 2 weeks ago in South Africa and then in London last week talking to investors, and we were all obsessing around China's changing patterns, changing tastes and preferences, attitude towards brands, because the reality is, China's consumer market is becoming more and more important every year that passes. I just before this sort of had a look at, in absolute terms, if China's consumption grows by just 5% this year, it's adding almost two of South Africa's GDP just in that space. So we're very focused on it. But what I was telling clients is essentially what happened last year will probably be the pattern for this year. The reality is that even though I'm quite optimistic on the broader economy, I do think that the consumer sector is likely to remain relatively soft. And that's largely because confidence is still down. We saw the PBOC release data from Q3 and Q4 last week. It confirmed that consumer sentiment is still relatively low. Income growth faces headwinds. Households are lowering expectations around future income, about jobs. And it looks like material needs are being lowered post the COVID era. And like Sherry said, it's more about experiences and going to gym and going to restaurants. And so services is doing very well, but I do think that it's going to take time for the economic momentum to gather enough steam for people's sort of consumer expectations to alter. And so, as I say, I think that the consumer story looks pretty much the same as last year, but obviously without the benefits of the base effects that we had last year.
Yeah, you both mentioned this shift from consumption of goods to consumption of services, which is a great thing, I think, because now that means people are less materialistic and more focused on experiences and health and happiness, which I think it's a growth, right, in consumption pattern. And Saud, as someone who closely observes global economic trends, do you see the same sort of shift in pattern? What do you observe in China's consumption trend?
So China provides an excellent example of consumption growth, and especially when it comes to economy growth as well. And since I have summarized into 8 points, like one of what Jeremy talks about is rising middle class, e-commerce boom, automotive industry, because China is one of the largest now in automotive industry. And then it comes to tourism and travel as well. We have seen on the Chinese New Year how much tourism and travel was there. And especially now in the service industry, where China is working on health sector, education, entertainment. And when we see the younger population growing in China, this is one of the main factors as well. We have seen a lot of urbanization when it comes to young population as well. All the young folks are traveling to big cities to find jobs, and and the main and foremost is infrastructure development that I like to focus on as well. That without roads, trains, without the people traveling from the rural areas to the urban areas, have a severe impact on the China's economy. And without that, it wasn't possible. And that's how the consumption industry of China is on a boom right now.
Yeah, infrastructure investment and spending definitely a big part of China's economy still. Now, Sherry, from a managing consultancy perspective, how do you think companies can optimize their strategies to capitalize on these trends that we just talked about, and and also capitalize on this consumption-driven economic growth model in China?
Right. We talk about a few keywords, right? One is like really on the material side, like really consumer become more mature, right? They really pay attention to value for high quality product. And so how like retailers, for example, will be able to really respond to that trend, really offer probably less gross margin, but really high value product. So we see some winners, right? Membership store, discount store, etc. And then on the manufacturing side, right? Like whether and how are you going to embrace those new channel, or like the old channel is really going down, the old channel is rising, but while you're dealing with new channel versus old channel, you need to resolve really the conflict on the price side, for example. And then also on the another keywords we talk about is health. So the product health and experience and health product. So for the consumer product, like how do you really make sure your ingredient is healthy, right? It's not only safe but healthy, right? To really capture that trend. We also talk about another keyword is experience. So and the retailer, for example, offer not only very good value product, high quality product, healthy product, but also offer very good experience, so that you can really take in share from the offline, also taking share from your competitors. Those are all the, I would say, like the fast mover, the competitor who really respond fast, observe, already act on those.
I was at the Consumption Expo last year, and a lot of the exhibitors there were telling me that there's this shift of Chinese younger generations preferring products that are not just made in China, but have Chinese elements into them, and like with love for China or patriotism incorporated into the products or Chinese designs. Is that something that's still going on this year, Sherry?
I do say it's going on, but I would say consumers still like they are more mature, they are prudent, the quality is still very key. So no matter what format, like China element by MNC brand, China element by local brand, no matter what format, the quality itself, right, the health element itself, are still most critical. So yes, on the one hand, China elements still going on. I would say to some extent, like there are probably also window of opportunity to Chinese brand if you can really keep your good value, right? Giving your natural, I would say, advantage on the cost, but still very important for you to really make sure you have a very competitive product.
Right.
Then others will follow.
Yeah, so consumers are more mature now and they want value for their money and they want mature products and competitive products.
Mature product, yes, Chinese element is important, but that's not, I would say, probably not the most important factor, right? Like the most important factor is still the product itself.
And Jeremy, how do you evaluate the role of consumption in driving economic growth, particularly in emerging markets compared with the developed ones?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the economic literature is pretty firm. It says that as countries become more developed, consumption plays a bigger role in driving economic activity. And as people become wealthier, obviously they spend more and more of their income on discretionary purchases. So, you know, that's reality, and that's been ongoing in China for a long, long time. The interesting question is, a lot of people thought that this pivot towards a more consumer-led market would kind of mean the end of investment growth in China. So a lot of people, basically, it was pretty clear from President Xi that the sort of mobilization goal in the Chinese economy had changed, but we weren't really sure how the shift to boost consumption was going to play out. And so the last couple of years, it's been pretty uncertain exactly what policy levers would be pulled to kind of support consumption and what would happen to property investment and infrastructure investment. But what seems to have become quite clear to me over the past 6 months, and why in the first comments I said I'm relatively optimistic for the Chinese economy this year, is because they've been pretty clear that it's not necessarily about, you know, consumption growing as a share of GDP and investment basically flatlining. Really, they see this as a complex issue around domestic demand. And boosting domestic demand does mean to some extent that it's, you know, shifting resources towards consumption. So that sort of fits the bill of like supporting social spending, education, supporting rental, hookah reform, which Premier Lee's spoken about in the last couple of weeks, which is apparently on the table for some time later this year. But it also means more investment. It means, you know, maybe less investment in property, or certainly less investment in property and traditional infrastructure. But now we're seeing significant ramping up of investments in renewable energy. And, you know, the reality is that, you know, that continues to provide important blue collar jobs to the labor force. And so people can pivot out of real estate into wind and solar capacity and the grid upgrades and so on and so on. And it also means shifting investment within sectors, so away from ICE vehicles towards NEVs. And so it looks like, to my mind, that policy has become very mobilized towards that end in terms of renewable energy, advanced manufacturing. And so we're actually seeing that play out. We're seeing industrial production surge. We're seeing that outpace consumption. And so what's not happening is necessarily consumption as a share of GDP rising. And I think that it goes to this first point that you mentioned, which Sherry's been talking about, is I think that what we're adjusting to is that China's economy grew so fast for so long that it was basically a rising tide for everybody, obviously at different speeds, and it created significant amounts of millionaires, it created significant amounts of middle income families. That sort of upward social mobility was really, really powerful over the last 20, 30 years. And I think that that's naturally slowing. And so people are adjusting. And I think we'll only know how successful the strategy is when, for example, university graduates start getting employed in high value add manufacturing. I saw BYD increased its PhD employment by 180% last year, its master's graduates by 200% last year. You know, so as you're creating those jobs for people and these university graduates, they start to spend money on going on domestic tourism services and so on, and that creates positive spillovers for the broader economy. Another point that I think is really, really important is that the policy seemed to be designed in a way that these operators in this new economy and in this advanced manufacturing and in NEVs, the sector's being designed so that the productivity gains, rather than funnel to shareholders and to investors in those companies, it's cascading down to households. And so it's unlocking a surplus through a value to cost adjustment. So a lot's going on in the spirit of boosting domestic demand and consumption, but it's not going to just magically materialize as consumption becomes 60% of GDP and investment becomes 40. And I think that is what people thought, and now they're realizing that's not the case.
Right. So it will take some time for us to see how it's evolving.
Correct.
And Saud, how do you perceive China's evolving role in global consumption landscape, especially in the context of this burgeoning middle class?
Yeah, so China's role has been this year very important, especially when it comes to global economic influence. We have seen now that China is the second largest economy in the world, and growing middle class, and it has been very influential for China, and especially the government policies that support consumption, provide subsidies, provide grants to these businesses. When I visited China like a few months ago, I went to these startup companies that have been helped by the government. So seeing that overall has been, really helpful for the overall economy, and especially for the consumption industry. And so especially the foremost, what I talked earlier, urbanization is one of the key, factors. The cities, especially from the rural areas, the people going to urban areas to work and, to develop their businesses as well. It gives them huge potential. Especially now we have seen these big cities emerging. And according to, the vice minister recently, he said in 2024, 5.5% growth in the first few months. So that has been relatively huge, a comeback after the COVID years. So a shift from investment to consumption has been playing a big role for China, especially promoting, and as I said, the government policies.
So you talked about promoting, boosting consumption and government policies. Which government policies do you think have been effective, and what do you think the government can do more to help with domestic consumption in China?
So, President Xi's initiative of Global Civilization Initiative is one of those initiatives that promote cultural exchanges as well. And when it comes to these expos, a lot of international companies can come in and promote their products and services where consumers can directly access to it. And it also provides an innovation hub for all these, companies. So, the government has taken a lot of initiatives, global development initiatives, by President Xi. So all these initiatives coming together promotes consumption, in the overall country.
Yeah, and let's not talk about the China International Consumption Expo, which is starting tomorrow in the beautiful Haikou city in Hainan province. Jeremy, can you discuss the impact of international consumer exhibitions like this on global trade and economic dynamic, and how can emerging economies leverage events like the Consumer Expo?
Well, I agree with you. It's very beautiful there. My wife and I bought a house there.
Oh, nice.
Like a little apartment where we can surf. So we love it. Our kids love it. And it's amazing. And I thought it was the biggest slam dunk of an investment, given how much the government's supporting that region in terms of being a sort of destination of choice for domestic tourists, but also a sort of hub for consumption. So a lot of what they're doing in that area makes a lot of sense to me. Of course, an individual trade expo, examining the sort of impact of that on global trade is almost impossible. But obviously, for the companies involved, it's massive. Basically, as far as I can tell, if you're a trader, if you're a brand, basically this is the sort of Olympics for corporates in that space, because China is such a competitive and compelling market. But I think it really reflects a sort of a broader narrative that's been playing out for the past 20, 30 years, which is that every year Chinese companies armed with ambitious leaders with amazing products have been reshaping global trade and investment chords dramatically. And this trend is sort of ongoing, and I think it will continue. And the more you trade with China, the better you get. For me, when I talk to the SA government or the African government sort of leadership, my point to them is that yes, trade is obviously a positive for economic development. It's an important vehicle, but it is contingent on what products you're selling, how you sort of using the revenue generated to reinvest in your domestic economy. How does it promote development? How does it promote job creation? How does it promote skill development? And China is a perfect example of how to do it well. In the sort of late 1990s, basically, China's exports to the rest of the world were basically foreign-owned, designed for foreign markets, for export, that sort of touched very little in the domestic market. But now when you look, the exports are predominantly Chinese-owned, designed for the domestic market, and then the secondary is, and then they'll sort of export. We see that with NEVs, but in reality, that's 5G, that's mobile telephony, that's, it's computers, communication equipment. So I think that they found a way to sort of mobilize trade in a way that fosters a pro-business environment, in a way that also is servicing that industry with first world infrastructure. And so for me, from a policy point of view, that's where I would focus. But of course, for the individual companies involved, and we're going to the Canton Fair next week as well, similarly. And for the companies that are involved, the deals, the networking, the brand visibility, the market intelligence is hugely beneficial. And so we encourage it very much.
Good to know. And you mentioned about the little apartment you have in, is it Haikou or Sanya in Hainan province? Just out of curiosity, are we still allowed to buy there? Are there curbs now on property?
I don't know. So I bought mine
long time ago.
5 years ago.
5 years ago. Okay, so that's probably still possible. Okay, sounds really attractive. I'm going to look into that. Now, Sherry, how do you assess the significance of the Consumer Expo for foreign companies looking to enter or expand in the Chinese market? What innovative approaches are you observing companies adopting at these expos to attract Chinese customers?
First of all, right, China is the second largest economy in the world. It's a very, as Jeremy said, very compelling consumption market. And then this event, right, is a very important window, very significant window of the foreign company really to gain really the share in this market. Yet, I would say that China consumption market has really, it's large, it's attractive, it's very competitive. And like we say, as foreign company, right? Many years ago, it's global for China, and then over the few years, they use China for China, right? In terms of product development, and now, like I would say, some company who are more advanced, foreign company who are more, I would say, or gain significant share in China, kind of like they have a term of China for global. So China become a very important, I would say, a market that you will only be able to win if you really first have a very competitive new product in this market. And also it's a very important source for inspiration for the new product, especially when it's come to digital, etc. Right? So we see a lot of company set up innovation hub in China for the global innovation. So in that sense, if we really come back to this event, right, like it's an important event for the global company to really communicate their really like very new and competitive new product to the China market. It's important event for you to really communicate your brand with your consumer as well as your traders, right? And a retailer go there. And also it's very important a platform for you to really understand the China market and also your competitor. So it's a significant and critical event.
Yeah, and a beautiful venue as well. Saud, how do you see the Consumer Expo influencing China's trade relationships and diplomatic ties with other nations, and how it serves as a barometer for the country's commitment to expanding its domestic consumption?
Yeah, so a few days ago, I was just in US. I spoke to a lot of businessmen, and a lot of people. Pretty much everybody's doing business with China. So, when you see this trend, and even in some emerging economies where you see this trend, China is going to this path of, as Sherry mentioned, a second largest economy, and diplomatic relations can be strengthened as well with the trade. So it gives emerging economies market access, networking and partnership opportunities, promotion and domestic access to industries as well, and policy insights, and helping them, and far more tourism. So this helps two countries or the countries to come together. That's far most important. As and Jeremy mentioned that he has an apartment in Hainan, which is like a free trade zone. So anybody can purchase there. You don't have to be a national. So it helps connect people, and especially have those good diplomatic ties as well. So, in general, it is a full package to access.
Yeah, getting together is definitely good for business, and it solves a lot of misunderstandings as well. Now, looking forward, Sherry, how do you envision the future of consumer markets in China?
So the China consumption market is going to grow, right? And it's large in size. It's going to grow. Yes, it has some short-term challenge, and people become more mature. But it's a very important market, and to the company itself, right? It's critical for you really to capture. I would say China is probably one of the most fast evolving consumption market. So how do we really capture the latest trend? And that's critical so that you can survive in this very competitive market. It's a appealing market, competitive, a lot of overcapacity, a lot of like innovation needed, etc.
And what do you think companies, especially foreign companies, can do to make sure they have this secure piece of the pie?
And so as we discussed, right, like really a very competitive product. Really launch, right, your most competitive, like the latest new product, right, in China market, not like using China market to launch your secondary new product. So a very competitive product, very important. And that's probably number one, right, for many sectors. And then how do you communicate with Chinese consumer? Very important. That's linked back to your question on, right, whether the China element is important, and whether, right, to what extent you want to really be sensitive on the communication, and then also the channel, very important, right? Like as we discussed earlier, like I think over the last 2-3 years is a very important, I would say, milestone of the channel really evolution, right? How do you really observe the trend of the new channel versus traditional channel, and how do you really take action on that while managing, right, your overall channel, I would say, portfolio very well? That's also critical.
So what's your expectations and outlooks for China's consumption market? What are some of the advantages looking forward, and what are the main challenges?
So I see the potential benefits of this, especially number one is brand exposure. What Jeremy earlier talked about, that, these companies can benefit from, the second largest economy and manufacturing hub. So it gives a huge potential to companies access other companies, buyers, and also see what's going on in China. There's a lot of innovation, technology coming in, especially when you talk about the electric cars as well. So, you also get market access and also expansion through these expos. And let's not forget the networking aspect of it. Like when the companies come in, they can access those hundreds of companies that are already promoting their products and benefit from it, because world is a global hub right now, and you can use Alibaba to order anything within seconds and get it shipped anywhere in the world. So having those companies in person physically and seeing their products is very different, and get benefit from the exposure. And market intelligence and insight is another thing that the companies can benefit from, when you see what the companies are promoting in all aspects. And especially right now, this expo is going to be sustainable, so sustainable goals are being promoted.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see that.
And Jeremy, you talked a lot about how you think China's consumption market will evolve in the next couple of years. What do you think will be the main challenges?
So, like I say, I mean, cyclically, I expect it to look pretty similar to what it's been looking like, which is a sort of gradual slowdown and maturing. I am still not sure how the pivot away from real estate as a store of wealth affects broader consumption patterns. I haven't really seen, if people stop buying homes and they decide that they're going to sort of draw down their bank deposits and stop buying gold, what are they going to pivot into? So that's a question that's still
Travel more,
outstanding.
maybe. Or buy a holiday home. Travel more. Buy a holiday home in Haikou.
Well, that's the point, right? I mean, President Xi said, that the sector's absorbed a significant amount of resources, and those need to be diverted elsewhere. Housing market's gone through 2 years of correction. There's a third one coming. It might improve, but it's still got time to run.
How long do you think this correction will last, though? Sorry to interrupt. Since we're talking about property market, we're really curious about that as well.
I think it's a few years. I think basically as a share of GDP, it's gone from 24% to 19%, and I think it's on its way to 10%. Right?
Oh, really?
And in some cities, I think in some cities like Beijing and Shanghai, and the cities that have strong economic fundamentals, and as they sort of reform hookah, even have favorable demographics, those cities have shortages, and they're going to see bottoming soon and a recovery. But I think in third and fourth tier cities, the economics aren't quite as favorable, and so those still have years to run. And I think the government's made it pretty clear we're focusing on affordable housing and making sure that viable projects can get completed. So the sector's got a year, at least another year, 2 years to adjust, maybe 3, maybe 4, it depends. And it's on a structural decline in its relative role in the economy. Now, that used to be where wealthy people put their money, and people bought a third apartment, a fourth apartment, a fifth apartment. And so the question is, those wealthy people, even if their income's not growing as fast, they're still accumulating significant amounts of deposits in banks. And we've seen gold purchases surge, not just by the PBOC, but also by retail buyers. And so how they decide to spend their money later is going to be something that we're going to have to understand. But I think that the real question sort of structurally is what happens in this advanced manufacturing pivot. Does it create jobs for university graduates that become high-paying jobs, that those people have slightly different behaviors in terms of how they spend money? Because I think expecting a sort of blue-collar worker from a fourth-tier city to start spending significantly more, in their last 10 years of life, 15 years of life, is highly unlikely. And so the demographics of that are pretty clear. And now the question is, what happens to the younger people going forward? So that's really, I think, the kind of metrics that you need to look at when you're looking at broadly the consumer story. I mean, what Sherry and Saud are talking about are much more like granular behavior in certain industries or certain products.
Yeah.
But I think broadly speaking, that's probably what's going to shape it.
Very interesting. It would be interesting to see what's going to happen now that people are not putting their money in investment houses, right? And what they're going to do with their money, because you know, the investment opportunities in China are somewhat refined, and so we'll see if people will spend more on traveling and healthcare and all that. Now, let's talk a little bit about foreign direct investment in China, as Kearney just released the 2024 FDI confidence report. Sherry, how does this 2024 index compare to previous years in terms of investor confidence levels?
So overall, we see somewhat increase on the investor confidence level in terms of foreign investment. I just want to also highlight, explain a little bit, right? Like this FDI, it's a global survey of the large companies' executive on the next 3 years confidence. So we do see some improvement, and the data shows that 88% of the interviewee, they are more confident versus last year that was 82%. And so overall we see confidence level improve to some extent.
Which countries or regions do you think are highlighted as top destinations for foreign direct investment in the 2024 index?
Right. So first of all, I want to talk about China, right? I think it is kind of very, very good, I would say, evolution, evolvement of the Chinese ranking in this FDI index. China over the last 1 year improved from ranked number 7 to number 3 across all countries, and China ranked number 1 among the emerging market, and then among the top 10 most preferred destiny for FDI, like we see two kind of emerging market, and China is one of them. And so I would say that's very good news. I would say that's also the reflection of the executives see the actions that taken by Chinese government, right, on a lot of like relaxation of the foreign investment, a lot of policy being even more friendly, in addition to, I would say, relative stable, right, kind of regulation and environment compared to many other emerging markets.
Jeremy, how do you see investor confidence evolving in China in recent years?
So I think that the bearish sentiment towards the Chinese economy has turned. I think that really last year there was a lot of negativity from at least my client base and my community as it relates to China and China's outlook. But I do think that the tone has shifted quite a lot since the start of this year, and I think it suggests what Sherry's saying is also playing out from the sort of more portfolio investor community base. I did see that. I mean, the reality is even sort of if you compare sort of Germany to China in terms of its share of market in advanced technology and so on, China's really become Germany 2.0. But even in that space where they're probably the most competitive, you're seeing, I think it was the majority of FDI in China last year came from Germany. A lot of the German companies want to partner with Chinese NEV companies to sort of build competitive products for the European market. I just think that China, the reality is that China's going to sort of, I think, call the Western world's bluff, and they're going to become incredibly competitive in advanced manufacturing. They are going to become by far the most green powered country. I mean, I think that they had a target for 2030 of like 1,200 gigawatts of wind and solar power. They're going to hit that this year easily, if not already. They're probably going to get to 3,000. I mean, this idea that like there's the regulation called CBAM, which is supposedly coming into Europe in 2026, which is like if you want to export fridges to Europe, it needs to have a certain amount of green, it needs to be a green fridge block. I think China's going to crush everyone in that space. So I think that the competitive landscape is going to change dramatically, and essentially China's going to make it pretty clear that either you're investing and working with us, or we're going to basically roll over you. And so I don't expect geopolitics to improve much, but I do think that, the reality is that for corporates where profit motive matters and where shareholders are telling them to do what's in your best interests, I do think that China is going to continue to be an incredibly important market. And I think that that's exactly what Sherry's data is saying.
Wow, very positive insights. Good to know. Saud, what are you observing in terms of foreign investor confidence in China?
So, we have seen the opening up of China since last year after COVID. A lot of companies have, started to take interest. And what I mentioned earlier, that I was in US, and a lot of companies are very interested. And most of the businesses are already working with China, whether it's import or export. So, we have seen over these last years a lot of change and opening up of China. And when it was a Chinese New Year, we saw a lot of tourists coming in. So we have seen a lot of agreements taking place as well. When it comes to a lot of countries. So, this helps promote China's positive image of opening up to the foreign world. And and especially the foreign businesses can take advantage of this largest consumption market of China. So, I wanted to highlight this fact as well, that according to Vice Minister of Commerce, Mr. Sheng, the China's retail sales of consumer goods, a major indicator of consumption, strength, rose to 5.5%, which is equivalent to $1.15 trillion. So, you have seen these trends and in actual growth. And this was just for the first 2 months. So, this is interesting to see how it's going to shape up.
Very interesting insights. Thank you so much. So we're very happy to have you today discussing China's consumption market, consumer behavior trends, and foreign direct investment trends. Hopefully, we're going to see you guys again very soon to talk about other topics on China's economy. Again, our distinguished guest, Jeremy Stevens, Chief China Economist at Standard Bank, Sherry He, Managing Director of Kearney Greater China, and Saud Malik, Editor-in-Chief of the Observer Diplomat magazine. Thank you again so much for joining us. And also thank you for our audience online watching, and we'll see you soon next time.